Thank you for inviting me to talk here in this webinar. So I'm Parag Chitnis, and my expertise is in plant biochemistry. So I'm a biochemist by training. I've had over 100 publications in plant biochemistry, including photosynthesis, proteomics, and metabolism. I was a professor at Kansas State University as well as at Iowa State University before moving to United States National Science Foundation, as well as then now at National Institute of Food and Agriculture. My remarks and views are not representative of the USDA, but are my own as an expert in this area as far as biochemistry is concerned. What I'm going to talk about is what glyphosate does, just the basic of it, and then how it is used in the United States. And before that, I also want to kind of make sure that this is based on the body of knowledge, just not just one paper, one publication in the literature, but a body of knowledge based on the collection of papers. And that's the way regulatory agencies in the United States use, is look at the collection of papers and then derive a body of knowledge. That's how FDA makes decisions about whether COVID-19 vaccine should be approved or not just by one set of data sets, but with a body of knowledge. So going back to glyphosate, this is an inhibitor, enzyme inhibitor that inhibits shikimate pathway. That's the pathway that produces aromatic compounds such as folate or aromatic amino acids. And that pathway exists in bacteria and animals. It does not, bacteria and plants. It does not exist in animals. That's why we are dependent on plant-derived foods for getting those aromatic amino acids and vitamins like folate, because we can't synthesize it. None of the animals can synthesize it on their own. Therefore, when glyphosate was first introduced and approved in like 1974, it was that because it does not impact animal biochemistry, animal metabolism, it doesn't impact animals. It is spread widely in the United States. Then companies came up with varieties that are resistant to glyphosate, and that is used in weed control. And environmentally, it has been shown to be safe. EPA, the body that regulates use of chemicals, including herbicides and pesticides, has approved it for wide use in United States agriculture. It has found that it does not have negative impact on health. For example, it has shown that there is no risk of concern to human health. There is no indication there is any concern to children. There is no evidence that it causes cancer. And there is no indication that glyphosate is an endocrine disruptor, like inhibits growth in animals or in humans. In terms of food safety, I think it is considered safe. One of the reasons I think glyphosate is considered safe is because it degrades rapidly when it goes in natural environment, including water or soil, because the bacteria there can consume it and then use it as a source of either phosphorus or because there are some bacteria that are resistant to those. So I think that's one of the reasons it has been found to be safe in the environment. So this is the background. And the other use that I think is being currently used in the India, like what I think Mr. Bedsaude just described, is for treating and what he called weeds, which are the invasive species. Those are not native to those ecosystems, and then they overtake those ecosystems. In United States, the water hyacinth or water lettuce are invasive species. They are not native to United States. They block waterways or other water bodies, and they decrease biodiversity in those lakes and water bodies, such as like the canals or rivers. They also, because I think some of the reasons I think Mr. Bhadsawade already described to you, they also impact the overall balance of the ecosystem outside the lake, because many parts of the lakes are used, like animals as well as plants are used by other, like either insects or birds outside those lake ecosystems. And thus, when an invasive species takes over, it decreases biodiversity and decreases balance of the lake ecosystem with the terrestrial ecosystem. This is the reason why invasive species are considered very seriously, at least in the United States, whenever there are either plants or animals that act as invasive species, where they proliferate tremendously in ecosystem where they are not usually found. They are controlled, and this is where, like, United States has, I think, strong programs in controlling different types of invasive species. Therefore, again, the chemical uses have been found effective in controlling invasive species and making sure the ecosystems are in balance. So this is the kind of a background I wanted to talk about. At least in the United States, glyphosate has been found to be completely safe in human health, in animal health, and also in environmental ecological health, as long as it is used at the levels that is recommended, using the applicators that are recommended, so that non-target species are not killed. The other part that I just, then in preparation for this, I kind of looked at the literature. What has been literature in terms of reptile kind of impacts of glyphosate? And there have been papers on different reptile species, how glyphosate may impact it. The only effect they have seen is temporary, and that's through the enteric bacteria, which may get impacted by high doses of glyphosate, which are unlikely to be in water bodies because it gets immediately diluted in water. And therefore, I think there is no significant risk posed by glyphosate in when it is used in water bodies such as large lakes, where it gets diluted right away. That's one of the reasons for the weeds that are inside the water. Glyphosate is not recommended because it gets diluted tremendously and it's no longer effective in killing those weeds. Only those weeds that float on the top of water, it can be sprayed directly on those weeds and can be then can be effective. It's also a slow killing weeds herbicide, so that it doesn't kill right away, which allows the natural ecosystems to actually use the organic matter release in a more conservative manner, more, I think, systematic manner, rather than adding it to the water right away, which could also make it more anaerobic, because the bacteria degrading it can immediately increase in the population. That's why it's something that is used widely in treating water bodies, in controlling invasive species. So those are the remarks I have, and I'll be happy to answer if any questions appear. At this time, maybe I can probably make some comments based on the questions. So again, just for disclosure, all my research was funded by US funding agencies, government funding agencies such as National Science Foundation, USDA, National Institutes of Health, and US Israel BARD. So it wasn't funded by any of the chemical making companies. So some of the questions here, I kind of was in the chat going over it. And so there was a question about literature. Is there a literature about phytoplankton impacts? And just simple search in Google Scholar or PubMed revealed hundreds of, I think, citations that came up. So there is literature out there. I haven't gone through them one by one to look at what concentrations were used and that type of, I think, work. So there is a literature out there. There was a comment about glyphosate, and this is the Bayer case somebody had mentioned about. Again, it's a legal issue, and it's still probably continue to go until the Supreme Court of the United States. So, but what my comments were based on the body of knowledge and the regulatory approvals of glyphosate, not a specific legal case. Very often those cases are based on what type of, again, I'm not talking about this case, but in general, what type of instructions are given with the use of those chemicals. I remember of a case in the United States where somebody spilled hot coffee in McDonald's coffee and won the case because there were no instructions on the cup that the liquids inside are really hot. So now if you go to any of the coffee place in United States, you'll have that instruction on it that the liquids inside are very hot. So be cautious because people can sue you if they haven't been instructed exactly how to use, at what concentration and how. So again, I don't know about the specifics of it. I won't want to comment on it, but I was talking more in terms of scientific knowledge, not a specific legal case. The other parts of this, I think the DDT question was already answered, and that's based on the half-life. The glyphosate half-life is in days, even in aquatic situation, rather than tens of years for DDT, which is a large difference in the half-lives. And so then there is also a question about some of the, I guess, the comments and questions I read were about certain states in India banning it. Again, that's the regulations in India and the regulatory bodies in India. And I do not have knowledge of what criteria and the process they use in deciding which chemicals to allow and which to ban. There was a question about, the long-term impact, and should we know if we really don't know exactly what happens? And that probably relates to what is called precautionary principle, which means that if a technology or a chemical, if there is even a little bit of uncertainty, because anytime when there is a risk, there is never 0% or 100%, there is an uncertainty. And then we shouldn't really adopt that technology if there is an uncertainty. That precautionary principle is something that many times many people advocate, and it's based on values and not based on science. Whenever we talk about risk, it's matter of what level of risk you want to take. Just take the case of COVID vaccine. A number of people in the United States do not want to take it because, again, they're making the same arguments that, okay, there isn't a long-term data because COVID-19 was just came into play only in 2019. But it's a personal value-based decision about whether you want to take that risk or not. Whether you want to take the risk of maybe 10 years later if there is an impact of that vaccine, or whether you want to live for 10 years because you take a vaccine. And that's the decision that people make based on their values and not based on the science that is available at that time. And again, Then there is also, I think, thrives in phosphate-rich environment, and there's urban sewage in Poway water, which makes it really phosphate-rich. And really, glyphosate does not stop phosphate addition to water because, as it was just mentioned, it is really minute amounts that is being added, and it gets diluted and then degraded rapidly. The major source of phosphate in waters like Poway Lake is not going to be glyphosate, is going to be the sewage flowing into the in the lake. And then I think there's a I think then there are, I think, some comments about, oh, maybe one odd paper which can refute a long-standing hypothesis, certainly, but it never is just one paper. Then there is a body of literature that is generated after that paper supporting it. A single observation, single study does not make knowledge. It may start it, but it will be then a body of literature supporting it afterwards. And I think that's something that's how the science works. Then there are papers, glyphosate does help absorb certain chemicals, which is true. There's also a question about effect on other fauna and flora, and I think it will impact if it is in sufficient quantities and it is absorbed in other plants, including ferns, it will impact their metabolism. But in animals, they don't have this pathway, and therefore it does not inhibit them and impact their metabolism. And it may impact the microbiome of the guts, which I think there were comments, and it was already clearly told with the fish microbiome. It's not just glyphosate. Anything that we eat, it impacts our gut microbiome, whether it is medicines we take or whether it is the type of food we eat. So there are impacts on microbiomes, and those are generally reverted based on how you change your diet and what is consumed or absorbed in your then I was just going through them. Then there is another question, which is why can't we just remove them physically? And I think that method is also has been used. That's why I think so. It very often is a combination of chemicals, physical methods, biological controls are often used, and then re-establishing those ecosystems by introducing the native species in those systems is a way to really like get rid of invasive species like water hyacinth. And I think then there is a question for Dr. Kashyap. I think these are covering, and I'll keep on reading these comments, and if there are other people who want to make comments at this time. Yeah, so I'll just make some, I think, kind of concluding comments, and also try to address some of the questions and comments that I have seen in the chat. At the end, if you think about any technologies, my research administration career has been really focused on shepherding use of technologies, whether it is in like biotechnology area or in agriculture, whether it is synthetic biology, use of robotics, AI, machine learning, and then now I think genetic editing type of technologies, and in its environmental and societal impacts. So when it comes to risk, like using glyphosate in Poway Lake, it has to be based on how much risk is you are ready to take and accept. There was a question about, oh, there is a difference between vaccine and chemical use, and definitely there is a difference. Both are chemicals. Vaccine is a chemical, so is the glyphosate. One is injected in our bodies, another one is sprayed in the environment. And often humans have different risk tolerance for what we inject in our body or we eat than what is in the environment. Different societies have different risk tolerance. And if in India, the risk tolerance is different than say in Europe versus in United States or in Southern America, those societies make those decisions about what regulations they should have in place to regulate those uncertain environments. And that's when I talked about precautionary principle and uncertainties, it's the societies that decide through their lawmakers and making laws what risks they want to take. There's a body of literature with glyphosate that has shown that it does not pose health or environmental risk if used according to its like plan, which is at the concentrations that it has been recommended and in the way it has been recommended. For example, I think the question came about is like spreading, which is not like non-targeted spreading of the glyphosate. And I think that's part of that use aspect. When there is a wind, it may go on the species that you are not trying to get rid of. And I think that's been addressed already. So I think if it is, and again, the risk that the uncertainty that you have with the risk, if the society does not want to tolerate it, it's that society's decisions through their lawmakers. And for science, they provide solutions, but it's the society that decides whether to accept those solutions or take a risk of not using that technology, or because there is a risk with that too, or using the technology and getting rid of problem, which may pose a risk for unintended consequences. So not knowing what the risk tolerance is in India, uh, it will be the decision for them to make, the regulatory bodies in India, as well as the society that elects officials to the government. Thanks.